Hey, friends, Kenny Ortiz here. I am recording this video to do a brief introduction of complementarianism versus egalitarianism. I'm going to explain some terminology that I use. It's a little bit different than most people out there that I think is more helpful. Basically, the word egalitarian in its literal dictionary definition just means equality, right? That if you want an egalitarian society, you basically mean you want everyone to be treated equally. In a previous video, I talked about the difference between economic equality and ontological equality, and how we have to make a distinction between those if we're going to really talk about equality. Because so often when people are talking about equality, what they really want is structural equality or economic equality, and that really is really an unfair expectation. And there's a lot of nuances and caveats to that I covered in a previous video. But that inevitably, the demand for absolute structural equality or absolute economic equality, the demand for that inevitably will lead to fractures of relationships and division amongst people, because it's something that will never happen. It's not realistic expectation. Ontological equality, though, is the idea that every human is created equally by God in God's image, and therefore every human must be treated with the same respect and dignity and be cherished and honored because they are made in the image of God. An attack on a human, an assault on a human, is an attack on God because they represent God, right? So that's how God views it. So to kill or attack a human is to kill or attack God. Or that you're trying to kill God. Like, that's how God views it. So it's extremely important that when we look at human beings, that we treat them with absolute respect and dignity that they deserve. All humans deserve that. All humans are ontologically equal and have inherent value, right? We all have the same value. Egalitarianism demands that because we are all created absolutely ontologically equal, that we must be treated 100% absolutely equal when it comes to structural or economic roles and the economic components within a particular framework or society or structure. Basically, absolute egalitarianism says all humans are of equal value, therefore all humans must be treated precisely exactly the same. There's no difference between human beings, therefore you should never pretend like there's a difference between human beings. That's the absolute egalitarianism. That's the ideology of communism, and Marxism is founded on the idea of egalitarianism. Communism, the ideology behind the government system of communism says that all humans are equal, and therefore all humans should have the same house, the same kind of car, the same salary, the same, like, you shouldn't have something your neighbor doesn't have. Your neighbor shouldn't have something you don't have. Everyone should be exactly the same all the time in every single way. That's kind of the extreme absolute version of egalitarianism. A lot of modern progressive ideology is based on egalitarianism, right? The most extreme versions of it will say, well, there is no gender. Humans are just equal. There is no man and woman. There's just human. So you shouldn't treat someone like a man or a woman. Even labeling gender is oppressive. Gender is just a social construct that was made up by humans, but it's oppressive. So you can't box people into being a man or a woman. You have to let people be free and treat everyone exactly the same no matter what. That's absolute egalitarianism. So the idea that there's no gender, that when it comes to sexuality, you shouldn't expect a man to only have sex with a woman. That's silly. A man should be able to have sex with whatever he wants, with whomever, whenever he wants. And a woman should be able to have sex with whomever, whenever she wants. With a man, a woman, an animal, it doesn't matter, because we're all just egalitarian creatures. We're all completely equal, right? That's the most extreme version of egalitarianism. There is a different variation of egalitarianism, however, that's become popular. This terminology didn't exist really anywhere in Christianity until really the 1920s, 1930s. But there's kind of a Christianized version of egalitarianism. And there are a lot of Christians, genuine Christians, evangelicals, people who love the Bible, people who believe the Bible, who use the term egalitarian. They call themselves egalitarians, but they don't mean what the actual word egalitarian means, right? The definition I just gave of the absolute egalitarianism, that basically is the foundation for secular progressive ideology, the foundation for communism and Marxism, the foundation for denying traditional sexual boundaries. All that's what actual egalitarianism actually means. When evangelical Christians I should say that specifically, when evangelical Christians typically utilize the term egalitarian, they don't mean that. They mean something different. So it can be extremely confusing, because sometimes Christians, they hear the word egalitarian and they think of the evangelical version of it, and they don't realize that in broader society, people who are not Christians, they are also using the word egalitarian, but they mean it in a totally different way. But a lot of Christians don't know that, and vice versa. There's a lot of people who are in the world, secular people who are not Christians, who they use the word egalitarian, and when they hear Christians using the word egalitarian, they go, oh, they must mean what I mean. Because a lot of the people who are not Christians, they don't realize that there's actually within Christianity, within American Christendom specifically, or Western Christendom, there is a specific subsect of Christians using this terminology of egalitarian. So that's a popular frustration when it comes to lingo. So you have different groups of people using the same word, but they mean very different things for it. So I propose that Christians should stop using the word egalitarian, because I don't think the word egalitarian is helpful. I think it leads to a lot of confusion, right? There's people who are not Bible believers, and they would be totally in favor of gay marriage. They think gender is a social construct, gender is fluid, gender is oppressive. And if they hear a Christian say, oh, I'm egalitarian, that person would say, oh, I'm egalitarian too. So they would begin to think, oh, the Bible endorses what I say, because look, at the Christian believes that, and they believe what I believe. But they don't. They believe different things. So we want to be extremely careful that we don't use that terminology in a way that's confusing. So in my opinion, we should banish that terminology. Now, that's probably not going to happen. The word egalitarian is being used by Christians all over the place. You yourself may call yourself egalitarian. There are faculty members at BGU who prefer to call themselves egalitarians. I just think that terminology is unhelpful because of the confusion within broader society. And so let me do this first, and I'll come back to what I think people should say, right? What language people ought to use instead of egalitarian. And so here is, you should see here on your screen. All right. Trying to make this you should see here, within the world of biblical Christianity, right? People. By the way, this image comes from a sermon preached by Matt Chandler, which should be linked up in Populi. If you're watching this video, you're one of my students at Bethany Global University. It's linked up in the dashboard. So there's a sermon preached by Matt Chandler that's fantastic, talking about the different portions of biblical Christianity. So here we have biblical Christianity, meaning these are people who are genuine Christians who believe the Bible, they have a high view of Scripture. Within biblical Christianity, you have people out here that are we would just call them feminists, right? They have a very feministic perspective. And for those of you who are my students, you should have read by now the textbook Design for Joy. So we've talked about the different forms of feminism: first wave feminism, second wave feminism, and third wave feminism. Make sure you understand the differences. I have not covered that in any video or lecture. It's covered in the textbook. Just make sure you understand the differences between first, second, and third wave feminism. But we have Christians, evangelicals, that would call themselves feminists, or maybe they call themselves something different, but they're actually feminists. They have a lot of feministic ideology. In my opinion, feminism is mostly flawed. It has a lot of harm, and we'll cover that in future videos. On the other end of that, and by the way, let me say this: you also see how Matt Chandler, his church, they have this line here in the middle, because a lot of people who call themselves feminists are not really Christians. Even there's people out there who call themselves Christian feminists, and a lot of times what they believe, you don't believe actual Christianity. What you believe is a distortion or a heterodoxy. And so half of them are not actual Christian, but half of them are. Half of them are feminists, but they're still Christian. I just would vehemently disagree with their ideology, and I think they have terrible interpretations of the Scripture, but I'm not going to say they're not genuine Christians, right? On the opposite side, as you see over here, we have patriarchy, which is also flawed and bad. Patriarchy is the concept that men should dominate, men run everything, men are in control of everything. Women are basically not given a voice. There are churches where women literally are not allowed to talk. Women are oppressed. They have zero value, zero voice, zero opinion. Now, I would say that there are people who are patriarchy in their ideology, but they're still Christian. They're genuine Christians. They just have really, really bad theology. They have a terrible interpretation of the scripture. But then I would say there's half of the people that call themselves that, maybe more than half, that aren't really Christians. They're just dopes, and they're not really Christians. And it's hard to put them in the distinct of their family. They're in the family of God because their ideology is so flawed and so harmful. It's hard to think that these people value humans the way they treat women. And then in the middle is where you have most evangelical Christians in America today. Most people fall into one of these camps. You have the egalitarian camp. Again, these are Christians who call themselves egalitarian, but when they use the word egalitarian, they mean something very different than people who are in the world, who are secular, who are not Christian, right? And then you have people who are complementarian, or a view called complementarianism. So let me explain what these two are within the world of Christianity. Complementarians believe that men and women are created differently, like the Bible teaches, and they're created to complement one another, just like two puzzle pieces, right? If you have two puzzle pieces, they fit together perfectly, right? What men have and what women have, they come together and they complement one another, meaning they fit together perfectly. What women don't have, men do have. What women do have and men don't have, they bring to the table, right? So they each bring to the table what the other doesn't, and they work together, and together they literally have everything they need to be in awesome relationship and to accomplish what God has called them to accomplish, right? It's this beautiful pairing together. This is complementarian theology, which is clear in the book of Genesis. The feminist says, no, we don't believe they're complementarian at all. And I'm like, okay, I don't know. It's in the Bible. I don't know how you read Genesis and not walk away saying men and women are different. They're equal. They're ontologically equal, but they're economically different. Right? That's important. Structurally, they are different, extremely different. So that's important to consider. So the complementarian basically says men and women are different. They complement one another. And the complementarian says that because men are called to be the spiritual leaders of the home, most complementarians would say men should be the pastors of their home. Women work alongside their husband. Husbands are the primary pastors and primary leaders of their home. Christian egalitarians, though, they take a different perspective. Many Christian egalitarians, they would agree with complementarians saying, yeah, we agree men and women are different. We agree Adam and Eve were created differently. And therefore, that plays a role in how we function. But egalitarians typically will say that doesn't impact who should lead and who should not lead. This begins to play out significantly more in the local church. Most complementarians are going to say men and women are different. They're created different. They complement one another. And therefore, men should be the primary leaders in the home and in the church. And complementarians would then say, we believe that Scripture would call only men to be pastors and that women should not be pastors. That's what the complementarian believes. Egalitarians, it's a little more muddled. There's a little more of spectrum. I've got another chart that I should bring up here. I'll find it in a second here. There's another, the egalitarians, they will say that men and women are created different, but some egalitarians say that plays no role, that the leader of the household should not be based on gender, but should be based on personality and strength. If the woman is smarter or a stronger leader or more spiritually mature, then she should be the pastor of the home. And of course, egalitarians would say, in most cases, there should be no difference. Men and women should be pastors. You shouldn't choose pastors based on gender. You should only choose pastors based on spiritual maturity, preaching ability, knowledge, leadership abilities, whatever, right? That gender should not play a role at all. And so most egalitarians, complementarians would agree, Christian version of egalitarians would agree, but egalitarians have very, very different opinions. And then you have other egalitarians that would say men and women are created differently. Men and women are unique, and we should embrace men as leaders in the home, but only in the home. That should not spill over into the local church. So Complementarians say men and women are created differently. They complement one another. Men should be the primary leaders in the home and in the local church. Egalitarians, though, there's more of a division. Some egalitarians say men and women are created differently. They complement one another. Men should be the leader in the home, but it doesn't matter what your gender is when it comes to leadership in the local church. There are other egalitarians that say men and women are created differently. They complement one another, but the leader in the home and in the church, gender doesn't matter. Sometimes a woman could be the leader in the home. Sometimes a man can be the leader in the home. Sometimes the church can be led by women. Sometimes it can be led by men. So you have kind of a divide there, actually, amongst egalitarians to some extent. So I actually have a different, another image that I think could be helpful. I will actually record a different video. I've got another image that I think is extremely helpful. That gives a different, gives you a different image that maybe I think I've got it here somewhere. I'm a dope. I should have had this ready. I apologize. I shouldn't say that. I'm not a dope. I'm actually intelligent. Thank you, Jesus, for the brain you gave me and the kindness you have shown me. Okay, there's another image here that I've got that I can't find it. I don't know where it is. And I should have had it ready. Oh, here it is. I got it. All right. You guys are like, Kenny, what is going on there? I know. I apologize. All right. Get it together, Kenny. I'm working on it. Here we go. Share that. Boom. Okay. All right. Let me make this a little bigger here so you can see that. Okay. Sorry. Here we go. Okay. So here is an image that I think is helpful because it shows you this is the image that Matt Chandler's church drew to kind of teach their people what feminists believe, what egalitarians believe, what complementarians believe, and what patriarchy believe. But I created a different one because I think this is a little more helpful. There's different language that I use. I'm trying to get through. Here we go. So I don't like the term egalitarian because I explained it earlier. I think it's kind of confusing. So I think because most Christians are going to agree with complementarian ideology, like you're going to believe men and women are created differently. Otherwise, you kind of have to be in favor of gay marriage, right? If men and women are exactly the same, precisely, equal in every way and completely egalitarian, well, then you can't be against gay marriage, right? The only reason you'd be in favor of traditional marriage is men and women are different, right? So if you're going to be evangelical Christian, you have to agree with men and women being different. So all Christians are actually complementarian. All Christians believe men and women are different and they complement one another to some extent. So I came up with this drawing. I did it myself just to kind of give a different picture of this ideology. I think it's a little more helpful. So rather than 4 camps, I created 5 camps. I got feminists and I got patriarchy. And you see, I purposely put them outside of the bounds of Christianity a little further than Matt Chandler's church did, because I think very few actual feminists are really Christian. And I think very few actual patriarchy people are actually Christian. Like when I look at the way feminists treat people and their ideology and the way patriarchy people treat women and their ideology, I have a tough time believing that they are genuinely Christian. I have a tough time believing it. So I think there's some, as you see in my little diagram here, but I think it's less than what Matt Chandler's church seems to be alluding to here. And I don't think they drew their image perfectly to scale, but I think I'm trying to intentionally draw mine to show a point. So instead of egalitarian and complementarian, rather than using those terminologies, that's the prominent term. When you read most books on the role of women in the church and the differences between men and women, the vast majority of the time, the lingo that's used by Christians is complementarian versus egalitarian. And I just don't think that's helpful. Here are the 3 terms that I think are more helpful. And I actually didn't come up with this on my own. I got these from an organization called 9 Marks. It's a ministry out of Washington, D.C., led by Mark Dever and Jonathan Lehman. They're pastors in the D.C. area. Both are prominent authors. And so they came up with this terminology that I thought was helpful of narrow complementarian, broad complementarian, and broadest complementarian. And the way they say is that the narrow complementarian is the person that believes men and women are different. They complement one another. That's why they're a complementarian, but they think it's very narrow. They would say complementarian ideals really only apply within the home. So a man should be the spiritual leader of his home. But once you leave the home, the gender differences are completely irrelevant. So when you're determining men and women pastors, it's irrelevant. Men can be pastors, women can be pastors. It doesn't matter. You shouldn't select based on gender or sex. You select based on skill set and maturity. The people that would say men and women are completely the same and therefore complementarianism doesn't even apply in the home, they would be in the feminist camp. So narrow complementarian. I find there are a lot of women who call themselves egalitarian, but they're actually narrow complementarian, meaning they would say, yes, my husband should be the leader of our home, but once we leave the home, I can take on any leadership role a man can take anywhere. So they say complementarianism is true, but it narrowly applies to the home only. So that's narrow complementarianism. All right. Then you have broad complementarianism. Okay. Broad complementarianism is kind of more equated with the traditional. So see up here, when people say complementarian, that's kind of equated with the term broad complementarian. Okay. And by the way, the reason why this image is over here is a different color and the complementarian one is different because Matt Chandler's church is in the complementarian camp. So they wanted to make it a different color just to show where their church is at. But for our purposes, I intentionally made our image all the exact same color. So I wanted to just kind of have an even playing field, an egalitarian playing field, so to speak. Playing on words there. Okay, bad joke. Anyway, so the broad complementarian says men and women are created differently. Men and women complement one another. Okay. But the complementarianism applies more broadly than just the home. It applies in the home and in the local church. So broad complementarian would say a husband should be the spiritual leader of his home and only men should be pastors in the local church. Right. That does not mean that women should not have leadership responsibilities in the church. The vast majority of broad complementarians would say that women should have influence, should be doing ministry, should be highly involved in the church, should have leadership responsibilities in the church, but that the primary spiritual leaders of the church are the pastors, and that should be reserved for men only. That's the broad complementarian, all right? So narrow and broad complementarians, they largely agree. They both agree. Men and women are created differently. Men and women complement one another. Both of these camps, narrow complementarian and broad complementarian, they agree that men should be the spiritual leaders in their home. Where they disagree is whether or not the primary spiritual leader of the local church should be reserved for men only or not. The narrow complementarian says women can be pastors. The broad complementarian says no, the Bible prohibits women from being pastors, right? Then you have a third camp, which I would call, I got this from 9 Marks Ministries, the broadest complementarian. The broadest complementarian is the person that says complementarian ideals apply in the home and in the local church, and they should apply broadly in society as well. Okay. So all three of these guys agree. All three of these camps, the guys and girls that are in this camp, in these 3 camps, they agree on a lot of things. They all agree. Men and women are created differently. Men and women complement one another. They all agree men should be the spiritual leaders of the home. Where they disagree is broad complementarians say men should be the spiritual leaders of the home. Men should be the spiritual leader of the local church. The broad complementarian takes it a significant step further, saying men should be the leaders of the home. Men should be the leaders, primary spiritual leaders in the church. Men should be the primary leaders in society as a whole. Again, women should still have influence. Women should still have some leadership responsibilities, no doubt, but the primary leadership responsibilities should be reserved for men. So the broadest complementarian would say a president, the office of president should be reserved for men. The broadest complementarian would say things like women should be prohibited from being police officers. only men should be police officers, right? The broadest complementarian might say only men should fight in wars, right? So you have broadest, and you've got some people that are kind of a hodgepodge, right? I myself personally, I am firmly in the broadest complementarian, the broad complementarian camp. I am not in the broadest complementarian camp. I don't think there's anything in the scripture that would prohibit a woman from being president. If I think there's a woman who would make a good leader and be president, I'd have no problem endorsing her and voting for her. So I don't think that. I do think we should be wise in what position we put women in. Like, could women be police officers? Sure, but we want to be wise in what we expect from them. Women are physically weaker than men in most cases, and so we would be really careful in how what situations we put women in, right? So we want to be wise, but I wouldn't restrict women from those positions. Broadest complementarians, they would restrict women altogether. Then you have some people. I have actually a good friend of mine who's a pastor, who he would say men should be the spiritual leaders in the home. Men should be the leaders in society, but he would not say only men can be pastors. So that's kind of a weird, that's a very, very unique, very few people would have that position. So he would say women should not be police officers. Women should not be president. Men should be the spiritual leaders of the home. But he would say women can be pastors. Again, it's a very unique position. So I don't even have that represented here in my model because it's such a unique minority position. So rather than using the terms egalitarian or complementarian, I use the terms narrow complementarian, broad complementarian, or broadest complementarian, because really, for the most part, the vast majority of evangelical Christians, we're all complementarian. All of us are complementarian in one way or another. And the word egalitarian, it means something different to non-Christians. There's a potential for a lot of confusion. And because when Christians use the term egalitarian, there's a lot of division amongst egalitarians as to how that works out. So for all those reasons, I think it's unwise to use the term egalitarian. I would recommend Christians to abandon the term egalitarian. Stop using it altogether. Now, the chances of that happening is very small. So when you're reading Christian literature, when you're reading different theology books, you are going to hear people use the term egalitarian. And what they typically mean is women are allowed to be pastors. That's what, not in every case, but that's ultimately what they typically mean. In a lot of cases, when people say complementarian, all they really mean is women are not allowed to be pastors. And in my opinion, to basically have an entire area of theology focused on just one component of the conversation feels like a disservice, because there's a lot more to it than just that. So throughout this rest of this course, for those of you who are my students taking my gender and sexuality course, I'm going to use this terminology, okay? Narrow complementarian, broad complementarian, broadest complementarian, all right? And I myself, full disclosure, I am in the broad complementarian camp. So I think that's important. Let me pull up one other chart for you that I think would be helpful. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up one other chart that here it is. I apologize. I should have had this ready, and I didn't. Here we go. Okay, so here are the preferred terms I just mentioned a moment ago. All right. So the term feminist, there isn't a better word for it. If you're a feminist, you're a feminist. And the feminist basically advocates for absolute equality in every way: economic equality, structural equality, and ontological equality, right? In every single way. Basically, if you believe the Bible, in most cases, you're not going to embrace this, right? There are very few actual Christian feminists. And ultimately, if you believe this, you're going to end up it's going to lead you down a road to believing very wonky theology. Down at the bottom of the chart, you see patriarchy. Again, there's not a better term for it. This argument is absolute male authority in every single way. Men run the ship. Men dominate. This, in my opinion, is anti-Bible. This is not Christianity, okay? Unfortunately and tragically, throughout the centuries, many Christians, many churches, in fact, I would argue most churches throughout church history have not been complementarian in a healthy way. They've been more patriarchy or patriarchal. They've been oppressive. And let me just say to the women watching this, I legitimately just want to say I'm sorry on behalf of men from throughout church history. I'm sorry that men have been so oppressive to women. I am sorry that men have been so patriarchal and dominating, and it's unhealthy and it's harmful to women. And to the men watching this video, I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you hardcore here, men, that you should fight tooth and nail to make sure that the women in your life have a great voice, that they are influential, that you treat them with great value, and that they know that they are valued in every way possible. I think it's extremely important that we fight against patriarchy because it has dominated Christian history so much in so many ways. So we want to make sure we fight against that. So, okay, that's me on my soapbox. Let me get back to the terms. So the word egalitarian is typically utilized. I think a better term for egalitarian is a narrow complementarian, right? This is the person that says the sexes are distinct, men and women are different, but complementarian roles do apply within the home. Okay. Most Christian women, most Christians that call themselves egalitarian, they're actually not egalitarian at all. They're actually narrow complementarian, right? And I always say that people say, "Oh, I'm an egalitarian." I find out what they believe. I go, "Oh, you're not egalitarian. You're actually a narrow complementarian. You're a complementarian, but you would believe that it narrowly applies only within the home. You believe men should be spiritually." In fact, I had this conversation with a faculty member at Bethany Global University, one of my colleagues, a female, and I said, "You call yourself an egalitarian?" She said, "Yes." I said, but you believe men should be the spiritual leader? She goes, "Absolutely. My husband is the spiritual leader of our home. My husband is the leader. I submit to him. He is a great husband, and I love him. And he has proven to me that he is trustworthy, and I gladly submit to him." I go, "Wow, that's amazing." And she goes, "But once I leave the home, that stays at home. I do not believe that my gender plays 1 ounce of a role in determining what I can or can't do, when I can or can't preach, what position I can or can't hold. Complementarianism is only in the home." So that's the narrow complementarian perspective. And then complementarians, I'm going to break those into 2 camps. Broad complementarians, people who say the sexes are different. Complementarianism applies within the home and the local church. And then the very broad, or the broadest complementarian, would say complementarian ideology and theology should apply in the home, in the local church, and within society at large. Students who are in my class, make sure you study this chart. All right. Make sure if you need to take a screenshot of this chart, okay, whatever you need to do, make sure you understand this chart. You will be quizzed on these terms. Let me say it again. Multiple times in this course, you will be expected to know exactly what these terms mean. You will be asked, what is a narrow complementarian? You will be asked, what is a broad complementarian? You will be asked, what is a very broad complementarian or a broadest complementarian? Okay. You will be asked these things. You will be expected to understand what these things are. Make sure you understand these things. That is extremely important. Okay. So that's it for this video. I wanted to kind of give you a foray into the complementarian, egalitarian debate. One last thought, just sort of a historical perspective. Pretty much all Christians throughout the centuries were pretty much all complementarian or patriarchal, really up until the 1920s or 1930s. And then you see a large movement of what they would call egalitarianism, what I would call narrow complementarianism, sweeping through the church. And now narrow complementarianism is very, very prominent within the church. The majority of mainline denominations, all of the liberal denominations at this point, a lot of Pentecostal, pretty much all Pentecostal denominations would call themselves egalitarian. Again, I would call them narrow complementarian. Most Methodist, most Lutheran, maybe about a third of Presbyterians. There are even maybe a small portion of Baptists would call themselves egalitarian or narrow complementarian. So it's very, very popular within Christianity at large today, but it pretty much was non-existent until the 1920s, 1930s. And we can argue about why that happened. But but that's kind of an understanding of it. So, and then throughout the 20th century, throughout the 1900s, the majority of Christians really embraced egalitarianism in a lot of ways. And it was in the 1980s where complementarianism really had a major resurgence. And that led to the Danvers statement. That led to the writing of the Danvers statement, which you'll get another video about the Danvers statement, the value of the Danvers statement, and how that influenced modern evangelicalism. So as always, if you're one of my students and you have a question, feel free to shoot me a text message or an email. I'm available to you. If you're not one of my students who are watching this video, leave a comment in the section below, and I'd love to correspond with you. Love you guys. Thanks for watching this video. Hope it was helpful to you.